Some old-timers will tell you that the roads have a memory. Most of the time, that's just a folksy way of saying you can see the ghosts of old accidents and the tire streaks burned into the asphalt. But out here, in the deep, rumpled folds of the Appalachian Mountains, it feels different, truer. These mountains are old. Not just geologically old, but spiritually old in a way that makes the hair on your arms stand up when the sun goes down. The big interstates just skim the surface, but the back roads, the little state routes that twist and climb through the hollers and guts of the mountains, those are the veins. And if you're not careful, they'll lead you right to the dark, silent, beating heart of the mountain itself. I was behind schedule, and in this business, that's a cardinal sin. A nasty jackknife and rollover on I-80 outside of Harrisburg had shut the interstate down solid. I was hauling time-sensitive medical supplies, and I was bone-tired. My GPS, a calm, steady female voice I'd nicknamed Sally, had been a godsend all day. So when she chirped to life and announced, "Alternate route detected, significant time savings possible," it felt like a prayer being answered. I watched the purple line on the screen shift, peeling off the main highway and diving south onto a series of smaller, curvier roads. But the ETA at the bottom of the screen dropped by almost 2 hours. That was the magic number. "All right, Sally, don't let me down," I muttered, and without a second thought, I took the turn she indicated. The difference was instantaneous. I went from smooth asphalt to cracked, weed-choked pavement, barely wide enough for my rig. The manicured farm fields gave way to dense, dark walls of forest that crowded right up to the edge of the road. I hadn't seen another car for maybe 15 minutes. This was old country, forgotten country. It felt like I was driving back in time. Sally's disembodied voice was my only link to the 21st century. The road kept climbing, winding deeper into the forest. The sun was setting behind the jagged ridgeline, a spectacular, violent sunset that painted the sky in shades of bleeding orange and bruised purple. As the light faded, the woods grew darker, the shadows stretching across the road like long, grasping fingers. And that's when Sally said the words that would change everything, spoken with calm neutrality. "In 1,000 feet, enter the tunnel." I eased my foot off the accelerator, confused. A tunnel? There was no tunnel marked on my paper atlas. But sure enough, as I rounded a final, sharp curve, my headlights fell upon it. This wasn't a modern project. This was a ragged, gaping hole, bored directly into the raw black face of the mountain itself. The entrance was a perfect, dark archway, cut into granite with old timber supports that looked petrified. As my headlights swept across the right side of the entrance, they caught something half hidden in the bushes. A sign, an old wooden one, weathered to a silvery, splintered gray. The letters had been hand-painted a long time ago in a simple, faded black. But I could still make out the words. The jagged, desperate letters spelled out a simple, and in the fading light, a terrifying message. Black Creek Tunnel. Do not enter after sunset. I stumped on the brakes, my whole rig shuddering to a halt. I looked from the decaying sign to the black maw of the tunnel, and then up at the sky. The last brilliant sliver of the sun was just disappearing behind the western ridge. I wasn't arriving at sunset. I was there at the exact moment of its death. My hand was on the gear shift, ready to find reverse. To hell with the schedule. This was the kind of local, hand-painted warning you don't ignore. But then, my dispatcher's crackling, impatient voice cut through the cab on the company radio. "Driver 41, what's your 20? You're pinging on some goat trail, and you haven't moved in 5 minutes." The sudden intrusion of the outside world was a slap in the face. What was I doing? Spooked by a rotten piece of wood? "Just hitting a short tunnel, Dale. Be through in a minute," I lied. "Roger that, 41. Keep those wheels turning." I took a deep breath. "It's just an old mining tunnel," I told myself. I flicked on all my lights, and with a deep-seated reluctance, I eased off the clutch. My Peterbilt crawled forward and disappeared from the last twilight into the absolute, waiting blackness of the mountain's throat. The moment the last inch of my trailer cleared the entrance, two things happened. The outside air was replaced by a deep, damp, cellar-like cold, and the roar of my engine changed instantly. The sound was swallowed, compressed. It was like I'd driven into a soundproof, vacuum-sealed tome. The darkness inside was a physical, palpable thing. My powerful headlights seemed to struggle against it, punching a weak yellow cone into an infinite, light-eating void. I couldn't see the walls or the ceiling. The temperature in the cab was plummeting. I could see my own breath fogging in the air. A greasy film of condensation started to form on the inside of my windshield, forcing me to run the wipers just to see. My connection to the outside world was completely severed. The cell phone had no signal. The GPS screen was a frozen map of gray nothingness. My company radio was now a roaring wall of hissing static. I reached over to turn it off when something else cut through the hiss. It was music. Faint, at first, a ghost in the static. A scratchy, tinny sound, a lone acoustic guitar, and a man's mournful voice, warped and hollow, as if played through an old hand-cranked Victrola. This wasn't just old country music. This was ancient. A classic miner's ballad. You load 16 tons, and what you get? Another day older and deeper in depth? St. Peter, don't you call me, 'cause I can't go. I owe my soul to the company store. The song was coming out of my state-of-the-art digital satellite system. I frantically fiddled with the knobs, trying to turn it off. Nothing worked. The sad, lonely song just kept playing. A funeral dirge for a long dead era. The song ended, replaced not by static, but by a new, more unsettling sound. A faint, rhythmic clink, clink, clink. It was the sound of a pickaxe striking rock, distant at first, and then another joined in, and another, until it was a soft, rhythmic chorus of work. The sound of ghosts on their eternal shift deep in the guts of the earth. With that chorus of spectral work, a fundamental shift occurred. I was no longer just a driver passing through. I was an intruder. I was trespassing in a place where I didn't belong. The song on the radio started again, a slower, sadder tune about a cave-in, about saying goodbye to the sun. That's when I felt it, the unmistakable animal prickle on the back of my neck, the undeniable hair-raising sensation of being watched. Then I started seeing them. At the absolute edge of my headlight beams, I saw pinpricks of light. At first, it was just one or two. I blinked, and there were more. They weren't reflections. They were tiny paired glints, like the eyes of 1,000 nocturnal animals waiting just outside a campfire. They were in the darkness just beyond the reach of my lights, lying in the unseen walls of the tunnel, and they were following me. I pressed the accelerator, but the louder my engine got, the louder the sounds of the mine became. The pickaxe sounds got closer, and then the voices started. Whispers, the low murmur of men's voices speaking in a rough, old-fashioned Appalachian dialect. Fragments of conversation about coal seams and bad air and blasting caps. They weren't talking to me. I was a phantom moving through their reality, not the other way around. The feeling of being watched intensified until it was a physical pressure. I felt the weight of their gaze, the collective sorrow and curiosity of hundreds of unseen eyes. Were they the miners? The ones from the songs? I imagined them lining the dark walls, covered in the coal dust that had been their life in the depths, the eyes the only thing left that held any light. And I was invading their tomb. The air grew heavy.
thick with the smell of damp earth, of coal dust, of spent black powder, and something else. Despair. The tunnel, I realized with a sudden gut-wrenching certainty, wasn't a tunnel at all. It was a mine. It was the Black Creek Mine, a sealed, forgotten mine, a mass grave. And I was driving straight through the middle of it. The sign wasn't a warning about bad road conditions. It was a warning about waking the dead.
I have no idea how long I was in there. My sense of time had been completely obliterated. The universe had been reduced to me, the roaring engine, the mournful songs of the dead on my radio, the rhythmic chipping of their endless work, and the unblinking gaze of 100 pairs of eyes. I was convinced that if my engine stalled, if my lights went out, that darkness and the things in it would just swallow my truck whole. And then, just as I was beginning to resign myself to the fact that the tunnel would go on forever, I saw it. A perfect, gray square of light, impossibly far away, but real. The exit. I've never felt a surge of relief like it in my entire life. I aimed the proud grill of my Peterbilt at that tiny square of hope, and I floored it. As if they knew they were losing their visitor, the supernatural phenomena intensified into a final chaotic crescendo. The ghostly music swelled to a deafening volume. The whispers grew into a mournful moan that seemed to come from the very rock itself. But I just stared at that growing rectangle of light, my promised land. I burst out of the tunnel and back into the real world with the force of a champagne cork. The transition was violent and jarring. 1 second I was in the cold, oppressive tomb, and the next I was out in the cool night air under a vast, silent sky full of 1 billion stars. The radio cut to static with a violent shriek, then went silent. The sound of my engine returned to normal. The feeling of being watched, it was all gone. It was over. I drove another mile before my shaking hands would let me pull over. I stumbled out of the cab and took deep, ragged breaths of the clean, pine-scented night air. I turned around and looked back. I needed to see it, to confirm that the monster's lair was real. But there was nothing there. Where the dark, carved exit of the tunnel should have been, there was just a solid, unbroken wall of granite and trees, a sheer cliff face that went up for hundreds of feet into the darkness. There was no hole, no archway, no road leading from it. It was just the mountain. It was as if the mountain had opened its jaws to let me pass through its belly and then sealed itself shut again, without a trace, behind me. I numbly climbed back into the cab and checked my GPS. The screen had come back to life. It showed my truck icon sitting on this little road, blinking placidly. But the path I had just taken, the shortcut through the mountain, was gone. According to the map, I had driven directly over the solid, impassable 2,000-foot ridgeline. An impossibility. I never did make up that time. I was still 4 hours late, and I got chewed out by my dispatcher. I couldn't tell him why. What could I have said? That I had taken a shortcut through a haunted coal mine that doesn't actually exist on this plane of reality? Years later, I was passing through that part of Pennsylvania again, on the big, safe, brightly lit interstate. I stopped at a little diner and got to talking to an old man who'd lived in the area his whole life. On a whim, I asked him about an old tunnel, a place called the Black Creek Tunnel. His face went pale, and he looked at me like I'd just seen a ghost. He told me the story of the Black Creek Mine and a catastrophic collapse back in 1938. They'd hit a pocket of methane gas. There was an explosion. The whole western face of the mine caved in, sealing over 150 men inside. They never even tried to recover the bodies. It was too unstable. It was a mass grave, a tomb inside the mountain. A tomb, he said, that the state had dynamited and sealed for the last time 60 years ago. I just nodded, paid for my coffee, and left. I finally understood the sign. It wasn't a warning. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a statement of fact. You do not enter after sunset, because after sunset, when the world of the living gets quiet, the world of the dead wakes up. And sometimes, just sometimes, for a driver who is lost and late and desperate, the ghosts of Black Creek open their door for just a little while.